Well, thank you all for being here tonight. I had a three-page speech to read to you, and I decided I didn't want to read to anybody tonight. I would rather just speak to you for a few minutes and just tell you exactly what I think and why I'm supporting Dean Phillips. I retired from the federal government. I was a U.S. Marshal, and so I was always covered by the Hatch Act, so I could never get involved in politics. And then in 2007, Joe Biden announced he was going to run for president and run in the New Hampshire primary. Well, being the son of an immigrant from Skibbereen County, Cork Island, and having dual Irish and U.S. citizenship, and being a member of Division I of the Manchester Ancient Order of Hibernians, it was in my DNA to support Joe Biden, and I did, and I worked hard on his campaign. From that moment until this moment today, I have great respect and admiration for President Biden. Now, fast forward 12 years after that election, and a lot had happened. President Biden served 2 terms as our vice president and did that very ably. I was in the New Hampshire legislature, and by the year 2019, I was Speaker of the New Hampshire House, which was a great honor for me. And President Biden asked me once again, would I support him? And I said, absolutely, anything you need. And I made speeches all over New Hampshire. It seemed after I spoke, the vice president sounded oh so much better. But I worked hard for the vice president. And then he told us in New Hampshire we had to change the date of our primary, that we would be voting with Nevada on the same day after the South Carolina primary. And then they told the Democratic Party, you got to change that date, but that date is in our New Hampshire law. And I was so disappointed in the president for doing that. I'd always been with him, I always have and always will respect him. But my New Hampshire primary, your New Hampshire primary, it means so much to me. Over 100 years ago, Democrats and Republicans in the New Hampshire legislature got together and said, wait a minute. Why are presidential candidates being selected by people in back rooms of political parties? Why don't the people have a voice? And in 1920, we held the first in the nation Democratic primary in this state. Well, thank you. And I've told several people, where else but in New Hampshire in the 2016 presidential primary, in 2020 primary, could a person like Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of the city of South Bend, Indiana, with a population of 103,000, the home of my second favorite football team, the Notre Dame, come to New Hampshire and come in within 1% of beating Bernie Sanders in a presidential primary, only in the Granite State. So as I said, I was disappointed when the president said, thank you, New Hampshire, great 100-year run. We're moving the primary first to New Hampshire. And then the president said, well, I'm not going to file in New Hampshire because you did not move your primary date. Well, it's in New Hampshire House. We've got a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican governor. That date wasn't going to move. And if it came up in the House, I would have voted against it. So the president said he wasn't going to file in the Granite State. And that disappointed me. And then, first of all, I heard from Bobby Kennedy Jr. And the first presidential primary candidate I ever met was John Kennedy when he opened his campaign office in Concord, New Hampshire, when I was 12. And so he asked to meet with me, and I met with him, and I went to one of his speeches at St. A's at the Institute of Politics, and we had lunch together, and he said, Steve, I'd like your endorsement. And I said, I got tremendous respect for your family. And I said, I got tremendous respect for you for what you've done for the environment, especially on the Hudson River. But there are some things that you believe in I can never believe in, and I'm sorry I can't support you. So up to a couple of weeks ago, I was planning on writing in my granddaughter's name on the primary ballot. And then I had a call from Dean Phillips, and who I didn't really know, like a lot of us. And I said, he asked me if I would support him. I said, well, let me do a little bit of homework, and I'll get back to you. So I did my homework. And I saw where he was ranked by Georgetown University 13th in bipartisanship in the New Hampshire, in the U.S. Congress. out of 436, I think it was. The fact he was a member of the problem solvers in Congress, working with Democrats and Republicans to pass good legislation, legislation that should never be partisan, legislation for children, for women, for unemployed, for the homeless, for veterans. And then I kept reading, and I saw that his dad died in Vietnam on July 25th, 1969. Now, I served in Vietnam from 67 to 68. And between all veterans, whether they man or woman, whether they served in peacetime or combat, there's a special bond. But for those of us who served in Vietnam, there's even a more closer bond. I won't go into the whys and the wherefores, but there's a reason that Vietnam veterans always say to each other, "Welcome home." And when I read about his dad, I couldn't get on the phone back to him fast enough. I said, "I read about your record. I read about what you've done in Congress. I've read about what you've done to reach across the aisle. But what I'm impressed just as much by is your dad's service." I said, "I'll be with you, and I'll support you, and I'll do what I can," and that's why I'm here tonight. I mentioned to you earlier about President Kennedy, and meeting him for the first time when I was 12 years old when he was running. He wrote a book, Profiles in Courage, that won a Pulitzer Prize. Dean Phillips running for president, in my opinion, is a profile in courage to step up. I know some of the comments I've heard. I can only imagine what he's hearing. But he is doing the right thing. He's keeping our New Hampshire Democratic primary alive and giving the people a choice and not letting others make that decision for us. President Kennedy also said when he was inaugurated in 1960, now is the time to pass the torch to the next generation, the generation born of this century. I'm 76. I'm in great health. I got a little deaf from hearing the band, but I'm in good health. Now is the time for us to pass the torch to that next generation. It's time for a change in Washington. I know that Congressman Phillips' father and his adopted father, that Artie and Eddie are standing together and looking down with great pride. And just as proud as I am to introduce to you the next President of the United States, Dean Phillips.